Hello again, everyone. I'm Dick Stockton, and welcome to Stockton. I hope you all had a great week. You know, I think the best thing about doing a podcast is the chance to step away from the play-by-play booth and talk to people, both in the sports world and otherwise, one-on-one. And I'm not talking about those 45-second post-game short-form interviews, but rather in-depth conversations with those I connect with and help you, get to know them a little better. And this is the sort of thing I'll be doing on Stockton every week, as well as sharing stories, insights, observations, and opinions on topics in and around the sports world and beyond based on my over 40 years in the industry. Plus, this is a real bonus about a podcast. I get a chance to connect with all of you, and that means I want to hear from you. First of all, be sure to subscribe to Stockton on iTunes and leave me a review because your opinion really does matter. And next, if you have an opinion on something you hear in any episode, not just this one, but any of them, or maybe there's a topic you think I can tackle, or someone you think I should talk to, or if you just want to share your thoughts on a subject or two, and here's how you go about it. Send an email to info@StocktonPodcast.com. Once again, the email is info@StocktonPodcast.com. And you can connect with me on our Facebook page or on Twitter @Stockton Podcast. Also, I'm going to wrap up every one of these with something I call Taking Stock, where I'll give you my opinion on a specific topic or news item that I think is worthy of a closer look. So Taking Stock coming up a little bit later, and, NBA is what we're talking about today, and I've watched NBA basketball for half a century. And so who do I think should be on the all-time team? I think you're going to be a little surprised when we get to it. But let's get to it right now. And on this week's podcast, I want to welcome one of the greats, a good friend of mine, classy guy, and a great player, and now a great broadcaster. 5-time NBA All-Star, 5-time All-NBA team member, a former NBA Rookie of the Year, and a former number 1 overall NBA draftee whose career spanned 15 years. And it's great to have Chris Webber here this week. C-Web, welcome.
Hey, Dick, how you doing? I feel like I'm talking to like my professor. That's what I think of you as because you're definitely a big half of this second part of my career, and so it's great to be on your show.
Well, I know one thing. We worked together. We'll talk about that a little bit more. And you have gone on to greatness. You're working on the number 1 TNT team with Marv Albert. Great play-by-play announcer, maybe the greatest of all time, I have to say, and you're his partner. I want to ask you, now you have your own podcast, and it's called Fearless or Insane with Chris Webber. Why the title? What's the podcast about, and what made you want to do it?
Well, I wanted to have a different discussion, just like your podcast is different because I know you're very humble, but, who has the experience of those years to be able to see the game, the full context? And so I know when I tune into your show, I'm going to get a unique and honest perspective. And I wanted to speak to fans about sport and athletes and the way they intersect with everything from culture, politics, to everything in society. And so my first podcast was with the chaplain of Golden State Warriors. He's also the chaplain of the San Francisco 49ers and was the chaplain of the San Francisco Giants. But what's unique is he's the chaplain at San Quentin State Prison. And so we talk about how he uses sport there to change the culture. There's a quote by Nelson Mandela that says, "Sport inspires in the most hopeless and bleak areas," and this chaplain, Earl Smith, speaks to that. And so hopefully we just have unique conversations about how athletes and sport affect culture.
The folks listening, Chris Webber is not just a guy who played basketball and now a broadcaster. I know that you're a pretty good collector, too, and I want to hear a little bit about that. African-American artifacts since 1994, and a collection that includes an original publication from 1901 of an autobiography of Booker T. Washington, documents, letters, and postcards signed by Frederick Douglass, Martin Luther King Jr., and Malcolm X. You've got to be pretty proud to have that as well.
Yeah, I am. My mother was a teacher, and she just loved history, and so all of friends that I had through schools have different races. I would talk to their parents about just the history of their family. And so after high school, when I got a chance, I just became very interested in these artifacts and collecting as well. And so, yeah, I was pretty proud that one of my favorite pieces is a book from 1847. It's the second book ever written by an African-American woman. The first book written by an African-American woman, the second book ever written by a woman. And, those type of things mean, just means a lot from the history. I love taking them to schools and showing kids and talking about how I understand that we all have obstacles, but imagine these obstacles and encourage them and say, if these people got through these times, you can do anything. So hopefully it's used to inspire at those schools as well as, I love just trying to be a quasi-historian myself. So it's a lot of fun collecting.
And when you talk to these people, Chris, do you talk about your own experiences and adversities that you faced?
Yeah, specifically the time out, Dick, when I go to these schools, I talk about, bullying is so prevalent at schools. It is. I really did not understand how serious it was because I think when I went to school, I knew that it was prevalent, but it was more in words. And as a kid told me a couple weeks ago when I went to the school, he says, when I was in school, you got bullied, maybe from 8 to 3. He said, we get bullied 24 hours on social media, through other ways because of the internet. And so when I go there, I tell them about, one of the worst times that I had. And I also tell them how you can get over that. You aren't, we talk about, let's say, for instance, your name is John. And John's mother, I hate to say it this way, but John's mother is on drugs. And that's his story. Well, the rest of his story could be John's mother was on drugs, and he used that to help many different people after that they would be able to cure that same disease. Or my cousin died from cancer. And that inspired me to find a cure for cancer. I try to encourage them to face that truth and overcome it. And I've been told by some kids that through telling them how I felt that night of the timeout, through telling them what my parents did and how others kept me strong, telling them about my faith, hopefully it just reaches one kid. But I do use the stories of Frederick Douglass and others to let them know how bad things were a long time ago and how they can overcome. And then, definitely let it hit home with what's happened to me, and hopefully it'll spark one kid.
That's terrific, Chris. You're using your experience in helping others, and so the depth that you have is admirable, and it really is. And I'm going to move into and this is really interesting, into the basketball part of this for our listeners who really like to know what you think. And you retired back in 2008, and the game you see now obviously has changed since your playing days. In what way do you think it has, good and bad?
Steph Curry. There was no Steph Curry wasn't as good if I did play against him. If he was around there, I don't know if he was, but I mean, he's his record-setting threes. The way they just had so much fun playing together, and I mean the Golden State Warriors before Durant, another MVP, came over. But I think the style of game, Steph Curry put an emphasis on the three-point line, which automatically built trust with coaches on the other teams, saying, you know what, we could use this as that big of a weapon. I mean, Dick, you did some of the most iconic games, and just think if Larry Bird had the green light of a Steph Curry, or if the NBA trusted that, three-point line the way that they do then. So I think that's one of the biggest things to me that's different about the game. And I would just say one thing that I would have said to you a couple of years ago is the disappearance of the big man, but I cannot complain about that with Drummond and the Cassar brothers and Whiteside and Davis and Cousins, and it just seems to be Gobert. It just seems to be some really great young big fellas playing. So I would have complained about that 2 years ago, but no, the big man is back now.
If you came into the league right now, what would it be like for you? What would be your attitude?
Well, it's funny. Charles Barkley has a quote. He says that if he were coming to the games now, he'd be coming in a spaceship. I guess that's how much ahead of the time he would be because of the players. But I would like to think that I would have a lot of fun and be able to use my skill set. I think that when I came into the game, people complained about a guy being 15 feet away from the basket at the free throw line. When now, Lopez, is shooting threes now. So he's 7 foot. So I just think that I would have been able to do a lot more of what I wanted to do and not be constrained by the type of game then. Not that I was ahead of my time, but I think that the league is in a place now where it allows the big man to handle the ball, to bring it up the court, do things that maybe they didn't allow as much then. So I told someone the other day that I definitely would try to be like a Westbrook and almost try to average a triple-double because I think if it's anyone that can do that, I think it could be Westbrook or LeBron. That would have been my goal.
Are matchups as big a factor now as they were a few years ago? I
think that's a great question. I do. The reason why I take a team like Toronto, I think that they are a great, they're a well-coached team. They play defense, better than anyone else, but I do not think they have the offensive players to win. I still think that in this league you need defense, but offense trumps defense because it's really about making an open shot. It's really about getting a stop. And if you can get 2 stops in a row, but you still can't knock down that open shot, teams don't trust you. And the preparation is different. And they'll take the ball out of, say, a DeRozan and a Lowry's hand and make someone do something else. So with a team like Houston, where Harden is the point guard and he's playing incredible, last time checked, he's probably averaging 5 times more assists than the next player. So in that matchup, whoever they play, you're going to take him out the game and make someone else do something. So I do think matchups and coaching still matter as much as they did a few years ago, even though the talent pool is different.
I wanted to ask you about the fans. And in the NBA, maybe more than any other sport, obviously not maybe, but definitely, it's an intimate experience with the fans since you're playing so close to the crowd. And we've seen where fans have yelled at players, harassed them. Dwight Howard, comes to mind, and there have been so many more. They call names and such, and as a player, you've heard the taunts and the insults when you've been on the road. Are you able to block that out, and what's your general thought about that?
My general thought is everything is fair except a comment about one's race or gender or preference. But everything else, is fair. If a guy is overweight and they throw Twinkies on the floor, I saw that in college, that's fair. If you get into trouble and they bring that up, that's fair because it is the business of basketball. It is, I grew up a big Pistons fan, and, what I took from that was to love being booed. I took that if you're booed, because when Akeem Olajuwon came to town, he was one of my favorite players, but I had to boo him as a Pistons fan. So I took that as a badge of honor to be booed on the road. And, yeah, there are fans that overstep the line, but people do that. But I want to keep the intimacy, as you said before, of the game. So I think there are only a couple ways you can cross the line, and the other ways we can have thick skin. And I think it's up to each individual to respect that. But I think if you pay a ticket, you can come and boo and you can come yell at me and talk about me as long as, we keep it within human rights. As long as it's, all good and fun, I think it's fine. And a lot of times winning, knocking down a shot and winking at the person that's talking to you is enough to, enough satisfaction when you win the game and leave them upset on the road.
What advice, Chris, would you give to a rookie player coming into the league right now?
The advice I would give to a rookie player is to study the game and do not follow the trend of today. Find a veteran, to find a coach, because the game is about longevity. And if you're known as a jumper, if you're known as a jump shooter, if you're known as a post player, it's not going to be enough. Whatever got you to this party, you need to go home and change and get some more clothes because this is a different type of party. And so I would say learn how to take care of your body and to make sure that you expand your game. The new NBA, you asked me earlier kind of what's the difference between when I played and today. You must have a skill set. You must be good on both ends of the floor. You can no longer get away with having one out of three skill sets. And so I would just say work on your game, young fella, and work on your game every day.
Let's talk about the broadcasting business, and you have risen to the top. Tell me how you've been able to do it, and don't say because you worked with me, you had the goods. And so, other than the fact that it was such a pleasure starting out with you, tell me what your feelings about being at courtside. I know you worked the NCAA tournament as well on CBS and TNT and all of those networks, and doing the top NBA game. Your thoughts?
Well, Dick, I have to start with you because that's the first playoff game I ever did, and it was in the Boston Garden, and I was nervous. I hadn't done really live games before. I mean, you helped me write my intro. You calmed me down. You told me what it was like to let it breathe, as you put it. You don't have to continue talking over every play. You talked to me about cadence. You talked to me about pacing, about transitions, and so I did not graduate with a degree in commentating or in journalism. You did, and you shared all of your experience with me. So I sincerely thank you, and that's just not BS. You know that's from the heart, but I would not have been able to do that. I mean, I got a chance to work with you. I get a chance to work with Ernie Johnson every day in the studio. So when he reads a teleprompter, I read along with him in my head, and I watch how he prepared, and then I get to, a guy like Kevin Harlan, and then I get to work with Marvin. So the way that I got here is the grace of God and people that have had the experience and been very talented, sharing that with me, and then me being smart enough to steal it from you guys.
Now today, of course, you're experienced. Tell me how relaxed you are now doing NBA games.
Well, that's why we need to do some more games, because I want to show you how I've improved. I'm no longer talking over you.
I know.
and bumping you and all that stuff. So, I mean, it's just so much fun. And Marv makes it very easy to work with. And Reggie Miller, I mean, he was a guy that took me under his wing, and I really watched how he prepared for the games, like what he concentrated on. And everybody has their own style. But he really, really helped guide me and really made me comfortable. And so now, I mean, I love it more than ever, and I just want to continue to grow, continue to get better, and continue to have fun. And one thing you taught me, and I'm glad you said this, you told me that every game is important. And I think we were doing a game, I don't know, but I didn't, I thought it was going to be a snoozer, and we found out, at the end of the game it was great. And I take that approach, and I think one of the weaknesses I have is being so excitable during the game. I think that I'm comfortable with being that because I love every moment of being there, smelling the sweat, watching people fall down, being on the court. And I don't want to lose that. And you were a big part of that. And so I'm very comfortable now, and I'm having a lot of fun.
Well, thank you for saying all those things, Chris. It's humbling to hear it from you. We're talking with Chris Webber, who is an NBA great, all NBA team member 5 times. We can go down the list. Rookie of the Year, one of the greats who ever played the game, and now the top broadcasting analyst on TNT's NBA coverage. The memory I have, Chris, is not so much anything in the game, but when we went, you and your wife, Erica, and I were at Fenway Park in Boston.
Yes. She talks about that to this day. I mean, because of you, I saw Big Papi a few months ago, and he remembers me from that game coming out, and then talking with you and you explaining how baseball was a neighborhood sport. And, Erica and I talk about you all the time. And then, I don't know if you want your fans to know this, but I want you guys to know Dick can really sing. So he also would, maybe serenade us before the game. And Dick, I miss the stories that we talked about. We talked about baseball and you being at the Polo Grounds and you telling me about certain players. And so I miss that full context because a guy could just read the headlines today and say, oh, this guy was like that. And you gave me more context. I miss, I tell people all the time, I really don't miss playing basketball because it was older, it was pain, your body breaks down. But I miss the locker room. I miss talking, and that's what I got with you by being a commentator, I still get that at Turner with Chuck and those guys, is the fact that I still get to talk sports and have those moments with guys that love sports just as much as I do, argue, throw some what-ifs out there, and just have fun. And so those are the times I remember, especially at the baseball game, but the same with you.
I remember, and I want to tell the listeners to our podcast that when we were doing the game that he was talking about to Chris, the playoff game with the Celtics, we got tickets at Fenway Park, and so we were sitting like in the second row right next to the Red Sox dugout, and the three of us were having a blast sitting there, and Big Papi came out of the dugout, saluted you, and it seemed that every player that went from the dugout to the on-deck circle gave you a look, a salute, a smile. They all were new. And so I knew that in the dugout they were saying, hey, do you know who's sitting? Chris Webber is here today. Chris Webber. And these guys know about, all of the celebrities that have been at box seats next to the dugout at Fenway Park. But the whole team was taken by you. And I remember Dustin Pedroia, who was from, I think, the area where when you played at Sacramento, knew you were there. He came out and came right over there and wanted to shake your hand and have pictures taken. Remember?
Yeah. I got a Pedroia jersey, so you're exactly right, and that's what I mean. Like, if that was humbling, and just to see those guys and then play and think about it, I got to watch, and you don't think about this at the time, but with the career that Big Papi had in retiring last year, I got to watch him play, and I got to watch it with you. So thanks for the tickets, because I never would have seen him play. And also a funny thing, I forgot, and maybe this is too much information, but their fans, they understand. It was my maybe first baseball game in 10 years, and so I was so excited. I forgot that you shouldn't have 3 beers in the sun. And
that's tremendous. Well, we were sitting and just facing that big, the green monster, right? That was an experience for you to be there.
Exactly. Yeah, and that sun just beat down on me, but no, that was a great experience. Yeah.
Chris, what a wonderful experience talking with you, and not just about basketball, but the way you're helping a lot of people, using your life to help them. You've always been your own man. You've not been a follower, and it's no accident that you've distinguished yourself in 2 different fields, as an athlete and as a broadcaster. And I'm proud to say that I know Chris Webber, and he's a friend of mine. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much, Dick. I love you, man. Thank you.
I love you too. Take care. Okay, now it's time for Taking Stock. And on the heels of our great talk with Chris Webber, I'll try to name my all-time NBA team. And I've been asked countless times, and frankly, it borders on the ridiculous, because all sports are a matter of the changing decades. And as we all know, the players in all sports become bigger, better, faster, and their skills and achievements are fresher in the minds of those doing the choosing. I was proud to have been the play-by-play broadcaster during what I consider a magical time, the 80s, which featured the great Celtics-Lakers finals. The Dr. Julius Erving and the fabulous Larry Bird sparked the revival of the Boston-Philly rivalry, which began in the 50s with Bill Russell and Wilt Chamberlain. That era also encompassed the Sixers finally winning a title, then the bad boys of the Detroit Pistons with back-to-back championships, and the oncoming force of Michael Jordan, who carried the Bulls to titles in the 90s, Kobe Bryant, etc., etc., etc. Well, I think Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was the greatest center of all time in a group of so many. Some I have named. He's still the all-time leading scorer, and while I'm not basing these choices on stats, he was in a class by himself. You have to include Jordan, who is either still the best player ever or second to LeBron James. James is the perfect example of what I'm talking about. He's sensational and current, and there will be more coming along who will actually make people put James in the background. It doesn't seem possible to say that today, but it's true. Magic Johnson of the Lakers was a player who can play all 5 positions in an era when that wasn't talked about it like it may be today. So now I think you have a problem. I'm going to name Bird, Kobe Bryant, Tim Duncan, a quiet machine who played nearly 2 decades and won a bunch of titles. And they may be considered as well. And more of what we have today, say Kevin Durant and Steph Curry, who Chris Webber talked about. Players like these. I wouldn't put the last 2 on any list yet and may never. But if you saw Oscar Robertson and Jerry West play, not to mention Hakeem Olajuwon, Karl Malone, the mailman, and still others, you would have considered them in a big way years ago, and the same for Dr. J, of course. Now, unfortunately, they are ignored. So I'm going to end right here, having named 4: Kareem, Jordan, Magic, and LeBron. All-time teams should be honored by the different eras when they played. Not all time. There is no such thing. Well, I want to thank you for listening, and once again, my thanks to Chris Webber for being a guest on this week's episode. A reminder to go to iTunes and be sure to subscribe to Stockton and leave a review. And a reminder to email me your thoughts and opinions at info@StocktonPodcast.com. Again, that's info@StocktonPodcast.com. I want to thank my producer, Peter Lyon, and our engineer, Pat Keogh, for helping out with this week's episode. Stockton is produced by Collisions, the podcast division of CRN International. Collisions, podcasts for curious people. I'm Dick Stockton. So long, everyone. See you next time.